So what now? You gonna sponge off me too? That was the first thing my father said when I came home from the military. No hug, no welcome, just a look that said I was an embarrassment, and then he showed me my old bedroom. Or what used to be my bedroom. He'd turned it into a gym, dumped my life into boxes in the garage like trash. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, my loan application got denied. Turns out, he flagged me as unstable. He used my own service record, 8 years of loyalty, as a weapon. But here's the thing. He forgot what my mother taught me in that same garage he banished me to. He buried me in shame. I built an empire from it. But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. My name is Janelle Sullivan, and I'm 34 years old. After 8 years in the military, I've returned to our small Georgia town where every street feels both familiar and foreign. My late mother Delia taught me everything I know about engines and integrity, while my father Leonard, once the town's beloved football coach, barely acknowledges my existence since her funeral. The cardboard box in my trunk holds Mom's old tools, each one wrapped in oil-stained cloth just as she left them. My fingers traced the faded veteran's grant application tucked beneath, her neat handwriting a quiet testament to everything she planned for us. My father's new golf complex looms on the edge of town, but I have something he doesn't know about. But let me start from the beginning. The Georgia heat hit me like a wall when I stepped off the Greyhound. 8 years of German winters hadn't prepared me for this homecoming, but then again, nothing really could. I stood there with my duffel bag, scanning faces that weren't there to meet me. You know that moment when you realize you're truly alone? Yeah, that was it. I shouldered my bag and started walking. The 3-mile trek to our house felt longer than I remembered, each step kicking up memories along with the red dust. Past Miller's Hardware where Mom used to buy her supplies, past the high school field where Dad had coached for 20 years. Everything looked smaller now, faded around the edges like an old photograph. Remember those movies where the soldier comes home to flags and hugs? This wasn't that story. When I finally reached our white Colonial, Dad's truck sat in the driveway next to his shiny new golf cart. The porch swing where Mom and I used to read repair manuals was gone. I knocked. Weird to knock at your own house, right? The door opened, and there stood Leonard Sullivan, my father, in one of his endless supply of golf polos. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his face set in that stern expression I knew too well. No hug, no welcome home. Just a long look that made me feel like I was 16 again and had missed curfew. So what now? You gonna sponge off me too? The words hit harder than any IED I'd ever encountered. My throat closed up, but I kept my spine straight. 8 years of military bearing doesn't crack easily. No, sir, I managed. I've got plans. Just need a few weeks to get set up. He snorted. Plans, right. He turned away, leaving the door open. I guess that was as close to an invitation as I was going to get. The house smelled different. No more engine oil and coffee, just artificial pine and emptiness. Mom's absence felt like a physical thing, pressing against my chest as I climbed the stairs to my old room. But when I opened the door, my heart stopped. My room wasn't my room anymore. Where my bed used to be stood a treadmill. My dresser had been replaced by weight racks. The walls, once covered with car posters and my high school diplomas, were bare except for a massive mirror. He'd turned it into a home gym. Your stuff's in boxes in the garage, Dad called up. You can sleep there if you need to. I'm heading to the club. The door slammed and I stood there, gripping my duffel until my knuckles went white. 8 years of service, and I didn't even rate a bed anymore. That night, I made a nest between Mom's old Chevy and boxes of Christmas decorations. The garage smelled like dust and forgotten things, but at least her toolbox was there. I ran my fingers over the rusty latches, remembering how she'd teach me to identify engine problems just by sound. Every machine talks, she'd say. You just gotta learn its language. I had a plan. It wasn't complicated. Get my mechanic's license transferred to Georgia, apply for a small business loan, open my own shop. Simple steps, no drama. I wouldn't beg Dad for approval, I'd earn it. Show him that all those years playing soldier, his words, had taught me something about discipline and success. Morning came too early, streaming through the dirty garage windows. I showered quickly, put on my best button-down shirt, and walked to First Georgia Bank. My appointment was with Brian Kessler. Yeah, the same Brian who'd taken me to prom 16 years ago. I figured that might help, you know? A familiar face, a shared history. Brian looked exactly like you'd expect a small-town banker to look. Slightly balding, nervous smile, shirt pressed within an inch of its life. He remembered me, all right. His handshake was clammy. "Janelle," he said, shuffling papers that didn't need shuffling. "It's been a while." I laid out my business plan, my savings, my service record, everything organized, just like the military taught me. But something was off. Brian wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'm sorry," he said finally, "but your loan application has been pre-flagged as high risk." He swallowed hard. "By Leonard Sullivan. Your father." I stared at Brian, my mind struggling to process what he'd just said. High risk? That's impossible. I have perfect credit, 8 years of steady military income and savings. Brian shifted in his leather chair, his collar suddenly too tight. "Look, Janelle, you know how small towns work. When someone with influence raises concerns, someone?" My voice came out flat. "Or my father?" The way Brian's eyes widened told me everything. I remembered how he used to stutter asking me to dance at prom, how he'd blush when our hands touched. Now he just looked trapped, like a kid caught between angry parents. "I really can't discuss—" "Save it." I gathered my papers, each movement precise and controlled like field stripping a rifle. "Thanks for your time, Brian." The bank's glass doors felt too heavy as I pushed through them. Outside, the Georgia heat slammed into me like a wall, but I barely noticed. My fingers twitched, an old tell from basic training when I was fighting to keep my cool. I walked past the town square, past the diner where Mom used to take me for birthday pancakes, past the high school football field where Dad's coaching legacy still loomed large on the scoreboard. Legacy. What a joke. You know that moment when betrayal hits? When it stops being about hurt feelings and starts feeling like warfare? That's where I was, walking those familiar streets that suddenly felt like enemy territory. Every Leonard Sullivan field sign, every Coach Sullivan's championship team photo in shop windows, they weren't memories anymore. They were battle maps. I got back to the garage as the sun was setting. Dad's car was in the driveway, and through the kitchen window, I could see him at the table, reading his paper like it was any other day. Like he hadn't just torpedoed his daughter's future. I slammed through the back door. "Want to tell me why the bank thinks I'm unstable?" He didn't even look up from his paper. "Tough love, Janelle. You come back here with your head full of nonsense about opening a shop." Nonsense? 8 years of military discipline almost cracked. Mom was a mechanic. She taught me everything. And look where that got her. He folded his paper with deliberate care. Dead at 45 from a heart attack, leaving me to clean up her mess of a business. The garage suddenly felt too small, too full of ghosts and unspoken accusations. I turned and walked out before I said something we couldn't take back. Fine. If I couldn't get a loan, I'd build it piece by piece. Started putting the word out. Basic repairs, tune-ups, whatever people needed. First job was Old Man Cooper's tractor. Fixed his timing belt, got it purring like new. Should have led to more work. It didn't. A week later, I was under Mrs. Patterson's Chevy when her husband came out, awkwardly clearing his throat. "Sorry, Janelle, but we're going to take it to the dealership instead." I slid out from under the car, wiping grease from my hands. "Something wrong with my work?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. "No, it's just, well, we heard some things. About you not being, all there. After the war and all." My rag froze mid-wipe. "Heard from who?" "Well, your daddy was at the Lions Club meeting and he mentioned, look, it's probably nothing, but with our grandkids riding in this car." I watched them drive away, the half-finished repair job rattling under their hood. The betrayal wasn't just professional anymore. It was personal. Dad wasn't just blocking my success. He was poisoning my reputation, using the very service I was proud of against me. Every call dried up after that. 8 years of combat vehicle maintenance, top marks in my unit, and now I couldn't get hired to change oil because Daddy Dearest had decided I was damaged goods. You want to know the worst part? The part that kept me up at night on that musty cot? It wasn't the lies or the sabotage. It was remembering Mom's face when she'd hand me a wrench, her eyes bright with pride. "You've got the touch, baby girl. Don't let anyone tell you different." The next week crawled by like basic training in August, endless, sweaty, and full of people watching me fail. I kept my chin up, though. Military bearing dies hard, even when you're dying inside. At Pete's Hardware, I overheard two guys snickering about Coach Sullivan's crazy daughter. At the diner, my usual booth suddenly became reserved. Even the library, where I'd been researching small business permits, started giving me side eyes when I walked in. You ever notice how shame follows you like a shadow? Gets longer and darker as the day goes on? I was picking through the produce at Walker's Grocery when I spotted Brian across the tomatoes. Our eyes met for half a second before he practically sprinted down the canned goods aisle. The plastic bag in my hands crinkled as my fingers clenched. I remembered our prom night, how he'd sworn we'd always be friends no matter what. Funny how always turns into avoid at all costs when someone powerful whispers the right words. That night, I couldn't sleep. The garage walls felt like they were closing in, and Dad's TV was blaring some game show upstairs, his way of drowning out my existence. I dug through my duffel bag, pulling out an old yearbook I'd kept for reasons I couldn't explain. Maybe because Mom had written, "Fly high, baby girl," inside the cover. The pages fell open to familiar faces. Soccer team, debate club, honor roll. Memories of a life before everything got complicated. Then I saw her. Marcia Tate, class president, my constant academic rival. We'd fought over everything from test scores to parking spots. Last I'd heard, she'd become city planner, never left town, but rose through the ranks like smoke through a chimney. Unlike me, who'd fled as far as Uncle Sam would send me. My phone felt heavy in my hand as I pulled up Facebook. There she was, profile picture, all business casual and confident smile. Before I could talk myself out of it, I typed, "In town, coffee sometime?" The response came so fast, I almost dropped my phone. Tomorrow, 7 a.m., May's Diner. I spent half the night wondering if I'd lost my mind, the other half planning what to say. How do you tell your high school rival that your life's imploding? May's hadn't changed. Same cracked leather booths, same coffee-stained menus, same smell of bacon and nostalgia. Marcia was already there, tablet propped against the sugar dispenser, auburn bob exactly as sleek as her profile picture. Well, well. She looked up, eyes sharp but not unkind. The prodigal soldier returns. I slid into the booth, ordering coffee when the waitress passed. "Thanks for meeting me. Heard you were back." She set her tablet aside. Also heard some other things. My coffee arrived, and I wrapped my hands around the mug like a lifeline. Let me guess. I'm unstable? Dangerous? A disappointment to the Sullivan name? Actually, she stirred her own coffee deliberately, I heard you're trying to start a shop, and that certain people aren't happy about it. Something in her tone made me look up. The competitive edge I remembered from high school was still there, but it had evolved into something strategic. My father. My voice cracked, and suddenly 8 years of military composure crumbled like wet paper. He's destroying everything before I can even start. The loan, my reputation, my mother's legacy. Your mother, Marcia cut in, was the only mechanic who'd work on my first car when everyone else said it was hopeless. She never cared that I was your rival. She just helped. The memory hit me like a punch. Mom in her coveralls, hands always stained with grease, heart always open to anyone who needed her. I had to stop, swallow hard. I wanted to make her proud. Instead, I'm sleeping in her garage while Dad tells everyone I'm crazy. Marcia leaned forward, and something in her expression shifted from professional to predatory. You don't need him. Leverage him. The next morning, Marcia's office looked exactly like you'd expect. Everything labeled, color-coded, and arranged with military precision. Maybe that's why I felt oddly at home there, even with my stomach doing backflips. City records, she announced, tapping her keyboard, are fascinating things, especially grant allocations. Her screen filled with spreadsheets that made my eyes cross. Your father's been busy since you left. I leaned closer, the leather of her guest chair creaking. What kind of busy? The creative kind. She clicked through several documents. See these veteran support grants? They were awarded to Sullivan Automotive, your mother's old shop, for training programs and equipment upgrades. The dates jumped out at me. 2019, 2020, 2021. That's impossible. Mom passed in 2018. Exactly. Marcia's fingers flew across the keyboard. But the applications kept coming, all with her signature. My throat went dry. Show me. She pulled up a PDF, and there it was. Mom's signature, but wrong. I'd grown up watching her sign repair orders, insurance forms, my school permission slips, the way she'd loop her D in Delia, the slight tilt to her N. This signature was too perfect, too calculated. Someone's been forging her signature, I whispered. Using her name to get grant money. Not just someone. Marcia's voice was steel. These funds were redirected to maintenance expenses at Golden Pines Golf Complex, Dad's precious golf club, the one he'd sunk everything into after Mom died. My hands curled into fists. How much? Over $300,000. The room spun. That was more than enough to start my shop 3 times over. Money that should have gone to veteran support, to people like me, had instead funded my father's ego project. We need to report this, I said. Marcia was already pulling up forms. As city planner, I can file a formal challenge, but... She looked at me carefully. Do you have any of your mother's original paperwork? Anything with her real signature? The lockbox. Mom's old lockbox, still buried in the garage under years of dust and denial. Maybe. I need to check. We spent the next hour filing the challenge. Every T crossed, every I dotted. Marcia's methodical nature matched my military precision, and by lunch, it was done. The Veterans Grant Review Board would investigate. 2 days later, the certified letter arrived. I signed for it with trembling fingers, reading it 3 times to make sure I understood. Leonard Sullivan had 30 days to respond to allegations of grant misuse and fraud. 30 days. The countdown had started. That night, I waited until Dad's TV went quiet upstairs. The garage felt different in the darkness, less like a prison, more like a tomb of memories. My flashlight beam caught cobwebs and forgotten tools as I made my way to the back corner. The lockbox was exactly where I remembered, hidden behind Mom's old welding gear. The key had hung around my neck since Germany, warming against my skin like a secret waiting to be told. It took 3 tries to get the key in. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. When the lid finally creaked open, the smell of old paper and Mom's lavender hand cream wafted up. My chest tightened. There, under insurance papers and old photos, I found it. The original grant application. Mom's real handwriting flowed across the page, confident and alive. I traced the authentic loops of her signature, remembering how she'd sat at our kitchen table, planning this future that never came. Got you, I whispered, carefully sliding the paper into a protective sleeve. This was it, the proof we needed. The real document that would expose every forged signature that came after. I had both the past and the law on my side now. But more than that, I had Mom's voice in my head, clear as day. Always keep the original paperwork, baby. You never know when you'll need to prove your truth. The next morning started like any other. Dad's newspaper rustling at the kitchen table, coffee maker gurgling its tired song. I'd gotten used to our silence, the way we moved around each other like ghosts in our own home. Remember those old westerns where 2 gunslingers circle each other, waiting for someone to draw first? Yeah, it felt exactly like that. I poured my coffee, black and bitter, just like Mom used to drink it. The familiar aroma brought back Sunday mornings when she'd let me steal sips from her cup, both of us giggling behind Dad's paper wall of ignorance. Sleep well? His voice was too casual, too controlled. Fine. I kept my tone neutral, stirring my coffee even though I hadn't added anything to it. Interesting mail yesterday. The newspaper lowered, revealing his face. Calm as still water, but I knew better. Those eyes of his, the ones that used to terrify fumbling quarterbacks, fixed on me. Care to explain why I got a notice from the Veterans Grant Review Board? My hand stilled on the spoon. Here we go. I think you know why, I said, meeting his gaze. The paper crumpled as his fists tightened. You ungrateful little... He caught himself, but I saw the mask slip. After everything I've done for this family? Everything you've done? I couldn't help but laugh, though it came out harsh. Like forging Mom's signature? Using her name to fund your golf club? He stood so fast his chair scraped across the linoleum. That money kept this family's reputation intact while you were off playing soldier. Playing soldier? My coffee cup hit the counter hard enough to slosh. I served my country for 8 years while you were here destroying Mom's legacy. Legacy? He spat the word. Your mother's legacy was a failing garage that barely kept the lights on. I turned that money into something respectable. You turned it into fraud. The silence that followed felt like the moment before a thunderclap. Dad's face went through a series of expressions before settling on something I'd never seen before. Calculation. Without another word, he grabbed his keys and left. I should have known it wouldn't end there. 3 hours later, my phone started buzzing with texts. First from old high school friends, then former clients. By lunch, even the grocery store clerk was giving me strange looks. That's when I heard it. Dad's voice coming from Mrs. Peterson's radio next door as she worked in her garden. He was on WGAT, our local station, the one he'd been giving football commentary on for 20 years. Breaks my heart to say this about my own daughter. His voice cracked with manufactured emotion. But her time overseas, well, it changed her. The stress, the trauma, we're seeing it now in this desperate attempt to destroy what I've built for our community. She's not well, folks. Mentally compromised from her service. My legs gave out. I sat right there on my front steps, listening as my father systematically dismantled my credibility to everyone who'd ever known me. He painted a picture of a troubled veteran, unstable and vindictive, trying to tear down a pillar of the community. Him. The worst part? People would believe him. They already did. By nightfall, I was curled up in the garage, surrounded by Mom's old tools and the ghosts of better days. Tears came in waves, hot and angry, then desperate and broken. The metal walls amplified every sob until it felt like the whole space was crying with me. Was it worth it? I asked Mom's empty toolbox. Standing up to him, fighting back? My voice cracked. Because right now it feels like he's won, like he's always going to win. The garage door squeaked open, making me jump. I wiped my face quickly, ready for another round with Dad, but instead, brought you some real coffee, Marcia's voice cut through the darkness. None of that gas station sludge you've been drinking. She hit the lights and I blinked, probably looking like a raccoon caught in headlights. She didn't comment on my obvious crying, just pulled up an old crate and handed me a steaming cup from Been There Done That, our local fancy coffee spot. The Sentinel called me this morning, she said casually, sipping her own drink. I stared at her. The Sentinel was our local paper, small but respected. They're very interested in covering the grant hearing. A smile played at her lips. Seems someone tipped them off about potential fraud involving veteran benefits. They're especially intrigued by the timing of your father's radio appearance. For the first time since the radio broadcast, I felt something other than despair. The paper wants to run the story? For 14 days straight, I lived and breathed documentation. You know those movie montages where someone goes full detective mode, with papers spread across every surface? That was me, minus the dramatic music. Marcia and I turned her dining room into command central. She'd come home from City Hall, kick off her heels, and dive right in. We tracked every grant application, every signature, every bank transfer. Dad's paper trail was messy. He'd gotten cocky over the years, figuring no one would look too closely at a respected community leader. Look at this, Marcia said one night, tapping her tablet. He changed the business classification 3 times in 2 years. First it was veteran-owned mechanical services, then community sports development, then finally private athletic club. I rubbed my eyes, seeing double from staring at scanned documents. Classic shell game. Move the money around enough times, nobody notices where it started. But something kept nagging at me. The review board included 2 of Dad's old golf buddies. Sure, they'd have to recuse themselves, but they had friends on the panel. Influence runs deep in small towns. You know how it goes. What if it's not enough? I asked Marcia during our 3rd coffee run of the day. What if... Stop. She grabbed my arm. Your evidence is solid. The timeline is clear. The forgeries are obvious to anyone with eyes. I nodded, but the knot in my stomach didn't loosen. That night, I couldn't sleep. I drove to the garage, my unofficial bedroom now, and pulled out Mom's old filing cabinet. The metal drawers stuck from rust, but I knew every folder by heart. Mom was organized to a fault, everything labeled and dated. The envelope caught my eye around 2 in the morning. It was stuffed between tax records from 2012, sealed and thick with that official notary paper. How had I missed it before? My hands shook as I slid my finger under the flap. Inside were 2 things, the original grant application and a letter, both in Mom's handwriting. The paper felt soft, worn at the corners, like she'd handled it multiple times before sealing it away. The date at the top of the letter stopped my breath. One day before she died. My dearest Janelle, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. I'm writing from the hospital, and honey, I know what's coming. The doctors think I'm resting, but there's something more important than sleep right now. I've enclosed the original grant application for Sullivan Motors. Your father doesn't know about this copy. He's been pushing me to think bigger, to let him expand into that golf complex he's always dreamed about. But this money, this grant, it was meant for you. I started this shop with nothing but determination and a rusty toolbox. Every time I heard women don't belong under the hood, I worked harder. When you were little, you'd sit on that blue step stool watching me work, asking questions nobody else bothered to ask. You have the same fire I did, baby girl, the same need to prove yourself. The grant is in my name, but the vision was always yours. Your father will try to tell you different. He'll say I wanted his golf club, his legacy. Don't believe it. I'm leaving you the truth in black and white, notarized and witnessed. Use it if you need to. Protect what we built. You're stronger than you know, sweetheart. And you're never alone. I made sure of that. All my love, Mom. The pages blurred. I pressed them against my chest, feeling the indent of her pen strokes through the paper. The garage smelled like oil and metal and memory, just like her. For the first time since coming home, I felt her with me. Not just in memory, but in purpose. This wasn't just about exposing Dad's fraud anymore. This was about honoring a promise between mother and daughter, written in ink and sealed in trust. I grabbed my phone and took pictures of everything, then carefully replaced the originals in their envelope. These weren't just documents anymore. They were Mom's voice, her last stand, her gift to me. When Marcia came by the next morning with our usual coffee, she found me already working, back straight, eyes clear. "You look different," she said, studying my face. I handed her the envelope. Mom left us a nuclear option. Mom's letter changed everything. Not just the facts, I already had those, but the fire inside me. You know that feeling when someone believes in you so completely that doubt just melts? That's what her words did. But life has a way of testing your newfound strength right when you find it. 5 days after discovering Mom's letter, I was elbow deep in an old Chevy's engine, my one remaining client who hadn't heard Dad's radio rant, when Marcia burst into the garage. Her heels clicked against the concrete, urgent and sharp. He filed to dismiss. She thrust a legal document at me. Claims the whole thing is baseless harassment from a troubled veteran. My wrench slipped, knuckles scraping metal. When's the hearing? 5 days. Preliminary review. She paced, her city planner clipboard clutched tight. If they dismiss it there, we never get to present the real evidence. I wiped my hands on a shop rag, leaving grease streaks that reminded me of Mom's old apron. He's trying to bury this before it starts. Exactly. Marcia stopped pacing. We need leverage, public pressure. That's when it hit me. Dad's whole game relied on keeping things quiet, controlled. What if we changed the rules? The paper, I said slowly. The Millbrook Guardian. They won't touch an ongoing investigation. Not directly. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through photos of the grant documents, the ones without Mom's letter. But what if someone anonymous sent them proof of irregularities in veteran grant spending? Marcia's eyes lit up. A concerned citizen, with carefully selected evidence. We spent that night at her kitchen table, picking through documents. Had to be public records only, nothing that could compromise the case. Just enough breadcrumbs to raise questions about where certain funds had gone. Use this email. Marcia scribbled an address on a post-it. It's secure, untraceable back to either of us. I created the account, TruthSeeker85. Attached 3 key documents showing clear discrepancies in the golf complex funding. Added a short note about veteran grants being misused. Hit send. The waiting was torture. I kept checking my phone during oil changes, between spark plug replacements, through endless cups of coffee. 2 days later, my hands shook when I opened the response. Dear TruthSeeker85, thank you for bringing this to our attention. These documents raise serious concerns. We'd like to develop this into a feature story for our Sunday edition, contingent on the results of any official proceedings. Would you be willing to connect us with anyone directly involved? Best regards, Sarah Chen, Senior Reporter, Millbrook Guardian. I forwarded it to Marcia with 3 words. It's happening, now. She called immediately. This is perfect, but you know what it means? Yeah. I stared at the email. We only get one shot. The story dies if we lose the hearing. You ready for that pressure? I thought about Mom's letter, safely stored in a fireproof box under my makeshift bed. About her belief in me, written in ink and sealed with hope. More than ready. We met Sarah Chen that afternoon at a diner 2 towns over. I didn't tell her I was the anonymous source, just presented myself as the challenger in the Grant case. She was younger than I expected, but her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. "This could be huge," she said, tapping her notebook. "Small-town corruption, family drama, veteran rights, but we can't run anything until the hearing confirms the allegations." I understand. If, she emphasized the word, the review board moves forward with the case, we'll need an exclusive. Your full story. The weight of it settled on my shoulders. One path forward, win the hearing, expose everything, go public with my name and face attached. "Deal," I said. She smiled. "Good. Because I've already reserved the Sunday front page." Later that night, alone in the garage, I pulled out Mom's letter again. The paper felt warm against my fingers, like it held some of her strength. 2 clocks were ticking now. 5 days to the hearing, 7 days to Sunday's paper. Dad's voice crackled over the local radio during my drive home, another community update about his troubled daughter. But this time I didn't flinch. Let him talk. The truth had its own timeline now, and it was gaining momentum. I clicked off the radio and drove in silence, planning my next move. The preliminary hearing would make or break everything, not just the case, but the story that could finally set the record straight. The review boardroom felt smaller than I'd imagined, just a converted classroom with fluorescent lights that hummed too loud and chairs that creaked with every shift. I'd spent 8 years in the military, faced down actual threats, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling as I arranged my documents. Dad sat 3 chairs away, looking crisp in his coaching jacket, that familiar confident smile playing at the corners of his mouth. His lawyer, Trevor Mills, kept whispering in his ear. I recognized Trevor from high school football games. He'd always been Dad's go-to for everything legal. "This hearing will now commence," the head reviewer announced, shuffling papers. "Mr. Mills, you may begin." Trevor stood, straightening his tie. "Members of the board, this case is nothing more than emotionally motivated fiction. Miss Sullivan," he barely glanced my way, "has constructed an elaborate fantasy born of resentment toward her father, a respected member of this community for over 30 years. My throat went dry. The same old story. Paint me as unstable, unreliable, unworthy. I caught Dad nodding slightly. "The evidence will show," Trevor continued, "that all grant allocations were properly documented and approved. This vindictive attack on Leonard Sullivan's character is—" "Objection," I cut in, my voice shakier than I'd hoped. "Personal attacks aren't relevant to the documentation." The head reviewer nodded. "Sustained. Mr. Mills, please focus on the facts." Trevor talked for another 15 minutes, weaving a story about Dad's dedication to veterans through his golf complex programs, about how I'd abandoned the family, missed Mom's funeral, a lie, come back demanding money. When my turn came, I stood slowly. The fluorescent lights buzzed louder, and for a moment I was back in that garage, reading Mom's letter for the first time. "Members of the board." My voice trembled, then found its edge. "This isn't about emotion. It's about paper trails and signatures." I pulled out the first document, Mom's original application. This is my mother's genuine handwriting, dated and notarized. I laid out 3 more documents, the follow-up applications Dad had submitted after her death. Note the signatures. They appear identical, mechanically so. Because they were copied. A murmur rippled through the room. Dad's smile flickered. "The dates are key," I continued, my voice stronger now. "My mother passed away on March 12th. These applications," I tapped the papers, "were submitted in April, May, and June. Her signature somehow remained perfect." Trevor jumped up. "This is circumstantial. I also have this." I pulled out Mom's letter, my hands steady now. Written the day before she died, sealed and notarized. In it, she explicitly states her intention for the grant money to fund a veteran-operated mechanics training program. I passed the letter to the board. Instead, those funds were diverted to renovate the golf complex's private lounges. The receipts are included in your packets. The head reviewer studied the documents, frowning. She passed them to the forensics expert, who compared the signatures under a light. The follow-up signatures appear to be traced or mechanically reproduced, he confirmed. A gasp rippled through the room. I didn't look at Dad, but I heard his sharp intake of breath. The board huddled together, whispering. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, the head reviewer cleared her throat. Based on the evidence presented, this board finds clear indication of grant misuse and document falsification. She paused, adjusting her glasses. However, given the severity of these findings, we will reserve full judgment until tomorrow morning to review all materials thoroughly. This hearing is adjourned until 9 a.m. The room erupted in whispers. I gathered my papers with shaking hands, victory and uncertainty warring in my chest. Dad stormed out without a word, Trevor hurrying after him. Outside, Marcia waited by her car. Well? They found the forgeries, I said. But final decision tomorrow. She squeezed my arm. The paper's ready either way. Sarah has 2 versions drafted. They'll run whichever fits the verdict. I nodded, too drained to speak. The sun was setting behind the old courthouse, painting everything in shades of amber and shadow. Just like the evenings Mom used to spend teaching me about engines, her hands steady and sure on the tools. You did good in there, Marcia said softly. Yeah. I looked at the courthouse steps, where Dad had posed for so many photos over the years. But it's not over yet. The next morning felt different. Maybe it was the way sunlight crept through my old bedroom window. Yes, I'd finally moved back in there last night, dragging Dad's weights into the garage where they belonged. Or maybe it was knowing that in less than an hour, everything would change. I got to the courthouse early, my heart doing double time against my ribs. You know that feeling when you're so close to something huge but you're scared to believe it? That was me, sitting there in that hard wooden chair, watching the clock tick toward 9. The room filled up faster than yesterday. Word must have gotten out. I spotted Brian, my old prom date turned banker, slipping into the back row. He still wouldn't meet my eyes, but at least he was there. Marcia sat directly behind me, her presence steady as a wall. Dad arrived last, looking like he hadn't slept. His golf polo was wrinkled, something I'd never seen before. Trevor, his lawyer, whispered something in his ear, but Dad just stared straight ahead. All rise, the clerk called. The head reviewer, Dr. Patterson, adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. The silence in that room was so thick you could have cut it with a wrench. After thorough review of all evidence presented, this board has reached a unanimous decision. She paused, her eyes scanning the room. The documentation clearly shows systematic misuse of veteran grant funds by Leonard Sullivan, including multiple instances of forged signatures and fraudulent applications. Dad's face went slack. I felt my hands grip the table edge. Therefore, effective immediately, Leonard Sullivan's veteran status is hereby revoked. He is permanently barred from receiving any public grants or veteran benefits. Furthermore, all current grant allocations are terminated. The room exploded in whispers. I sat there, completely still, as if moving might make it all disappear. Additionally, Dr. Patterson continued, raising her voice slightly. Evidence of tax irregularities has been forwarded to the appropriate authorities. That's when Dad finally looked at me. Really looked at me. The realization dawned in his eyes. He knew I'd been the one to slip those tax records to the board 3 weeks ago. All those nights I'd spent digging through Mom's old files, I'd found more than just grant applications. He stood up so fast his chair tipped over. This is outrageous. I've served this community for 30 years. Mr. Sullivan, Dr. Patterson cut in sharply, please control yourself or you'll be removed. Trevor grabbed Dad's arm, but Dad shook him off and stormed out. The heavy doors slammed behind him. By noon, it was everywhere. The local news vans parked outside the golf complex watched as county officials posted closure notices. Tax delinquent signs went up over the pristine lawns Dad had been so proud of. Sarah from the paper called me for final comments on her story. It's running tomorrow, she said. Front page. Any last thoughts? I thought about all those nights in the garage, surrounded by Mom's old tools and memories. About how Dad had tried to bury me in shame. Just one, I told her. Sometimes the best revenge is building something beautiful from the ashes. The next morning, I walked into Pete's Diner for coffee and nearly dropped my keys. There it was, spread across the counter where everyone could see it. Daughter reclaims what was hers, in bold black letters. Below it, a photo of me in my work apron, torch in hand, welding the Sullivan Motors sign that would go up next week. Pete himself brought my coffee over. "On the house," he said, then hesitated. "Listen, my delivery van's been making this weird clicking sound." I smiled. "Bring it by the shop next week. I'll take a look." That was just the beginning. By lunchtime, my phone had 6 messages. Mrs. Henderson's tractor, the Miller boys' dirt bikes. Even Brian called, stammering through an apology before asking if I could check his Mustang's transmission. Dad's office at the golf complex was dark when I drove past that evening. No Mercedes in his spot, no country club members lingering on the deck, just empty fairways stretching into the sunset. I didn't feel the triumph I'd expected. Instead, I felt something quieter, something steadier, like the way Mom used to feel after finishing a particularly tough repair job, satisfied, but already thinking about the next challenge. The garage light was on when I pulled into our driveway. For a moment, my heart jumped, but it wasn't Dad. It was just my work lamp, right where I'd left it, shining over Mom's old toolbox and the half-dozen repair manuals I'd been studying. 3 days after the ruling, Marcia spread a stack of property listings across her desk. "This one," she said, tapping a photo of a worn-down corner lot. "Perfect visibility, good traffic, and the owner's desperate to lease." I studied the cracked concrete and rusted chain-link fence. "It looks like a disaster?" Marcia grinned. "That's why it's perfect. Low starting rent, and I can fast-track the zoning permit since it's already commercial. The settlement money from Dad's grant misuse would cover 6 months' rent and basic renovations. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start." The next morning, I signed the lease. Mr. Peterson, the owner, handed me the keys with shaking hands, probably worried I'd back out when I saw the mess up close. But standing there, watching sunrise paint the old lot gold, all I could see was possibility. You know that feeling when you're about to start a big project and your fingers itch to just dive in? That was me, every muscle ready to transform this patch of neglected earth into something real. I spent that first week just clearing debris. Found all sorts of treasures buried under the weeds, old spark plugs, timing belts, even a perfectly good torquey wrench. Mom would have loved that. She always said other people's trash was a mechanic's treasure box. Marcia stopped by every few days, tablet in hand, checking off permit requirements. "You need proper drainage here," she'd say, or "let's adjust the parking layout." She never mentioned Dad, but I caught her satisfied smirk whenever another golf club member drove past, slowing down to stare. The real work started when the building materials arrived. I'd drafted the shop's layout myself: 3 bays, a small office, and a customer waiting area. Nothing fancy, but functional. Every evening after cleanup, I'd weld support beams under portable floodlights, the spark shower reflecting off my face shield like tiny stars. "You're crazy, you know that?" Marcia said one night, bringing me coffee at midnight. "You could hire people to do this." I switched off my torch. Need to do it myself. Every weld, every joint, it has to be mine. She nodded, understanding what I couldn't quite say. This wasn't just about building a shop. It was about proving something. To myself, to Dad, to everyone who'd whispered behind my back. The frame went up beam by beam. Each night, I'd step back, muscles aching, and see it growing taller against the sky. During the day, I supervised the concrete pour, the electrical work, the plumbing installation. Everything had to be perfect. Sarah from the paper showed up unannounced one evening, camera in hand. She caught me in my element, welding torch blazing, sparks flying. "This'll make a great follow-up," she said. "Mind if I ask you something personal?" I set down my torch. "Shoot. Why here? After everything that happened, you could have started fresh somewhere else." The question hit home. I looked around at the half-built walls, the tools scattered across sawhorses, the Sullivan Motors sign waiting to be mounted. Because running away isn't the same as moving forward. She smiled and snapped another photo. The opening date was set for 6 weeks after the ruling. Ambitious, maybe even reckless. But I needed that deadline, needed that pressure pushing me forward. Every morning I'd arrive before sunrise. Every night, I'd leave long after the streetlights came on. Marcia brought the final permit approval herself, along with a bottle of champagne. "Save it for opening day," she said, then paused. "You know he's still in town, right? Living at the Hampton Inn." I nodded, focusing on the weld joint I was cleaning. Dad hadn't tried to contact me, hadn't driven past the lot even once. Part of me was relieved. Part of me was still that little girl who used to watch him coach, desperate for a good job, kiddo. But standing there in my half-built shop, surrounded by the smell of metal and possibility, I realized something. I didn't need his approval anymore. I was building something bigger than his shadow. The paper scheduled their photographer for opening day. "We want to capture the whole journey," Sarah explained. "From that first ruling to your first customer." I looked at my calendar. 3 weeks left. The walls were up, the roof was on, and the bays were taking shape. Soon the equipment would arrive. Soon those empty spaces would hum with life and purpose. That night, after everyone left, I sat in what would become my office. Through the window, I could see my work lamp casting long shadows across the shop floor. Mom's old toolbox sat in the corner, waiting to be unpacked. Opening day dawned crisp and clear, the kind of Georgia morning that makes you believe anything's possible. I'd been up since 4, triple-checking equipment, arranging tools, and polishing every surface until it gleamed. The smell of fresh paint and new rubber mats mixed with that familiar garage scent I'd grown up with: oil, metal, and endless possibility. You know those moments when your whole life seems to pivot? This was one of them. I stood outside watching the sun climb over my shop. My shop. The words still felt strange on my tongue, like a foreign language I was just learning to speak. The parking lot was empty for now, but Sarah from the paper had promised to bring her photographer by at 9. Marcia would arrive early too, clipboard in hand, making sure every permit was visible and every safety regulation met. The plaque felt heavy in my hands. Sullivan Motors, 3 feet of brushed steel that I'd designed myself. Mom would have loved the simple, clean lines. She always said fancy logos were just ways to hide shoddy workmanship. My fingers traced each letter, remembering how she'd taught me to read by pointing out parts in her old Chilton manuals. Need help setting up? I turned to find Marcus, my first official hire, walking up with 2 cups of coffee. He'd been one of the few mechanics in town who'd stood by me during everything with Dad. "Just waiting on the crowd," I said, taking a cup. "You ready for this?" He grinned. "Born ready, boss." The word made my stomach flip. Boss. Another new language to learn. By 8:30, cars started pulling into the lot. I recognized most of the faces. Mrs. Henderson, whose tractor I'd fixed last summer. Pete from the hardware store, even Brian from the bank, though he stayed near his car, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. The whispers had changed. No more poor thing or not quite right. Now they were saying things like, showed real grit, and just like her mama. Marcia arrived in her city planner suit, but she'd brought her own welding gloves. "Thought you might want backup," she said, squeezing my arm. Then quieter. "The Hampton Inn called. He checked out last night." I nodded, letting the information settle without letting it shake me. Dad leaving town was fitting, somehow. He'd always run from the hard things. Sarah and her photographer showed up right at 9, along with what seemed like half the town. The crowd spilled onto the sidewalk. Faces I knew, faces I didn't, all watching as I pulled on my welding gloves and picked up my torch. "Ready for your close-up?" Sarah asked, notepad ready. I adjusted my face shield. "Ready to work." The photographer positioned himself for the shot as I lined up the plaque against the mounting brackets we'd installed yesterday. The metal was cool against my palms, solid and real, just like Mom's hands had been when she'd taught me my first weld seam. Someone in the crowd called out, "You've got this, Janelle!" Others joined in with whoops and claps. But all I heard was the quiet hum of the torch igniting, that familiar blue flame coming to life in my hands. This wasn't just about mounting a sign. This was about claiming space, about turning shame into strength. Every person watching knew the story now. The betrayal, the fight, the victory. But this moment, this was about something older, deeper. This was about a little girl who used to watch her mother work magic with metal and fire. I took a breath, centered myself, and lifted the torch. The flame caught the morning light, throwing blue shadows across the shop's fresh paint. My hands didn't shake anymore. They were steady, sure, ready to make something permanent. The crowd went quiet as I touched flame to metal. Sparks cascaded down like falling stars, each one carrying a piece of the past away and welding something new in its place. Through my shield, I watched the metal begin to flow, joining piece to piece, story to story. This was it. This was the moment when everything changed. Not in the hearing room, not in the newspaper headlines, but right here, with fire and steel and truth. The first seam was perfect. The metal hissed and sparked beneath my torch, each seam joining more than just steel to steel. The morning sun caught the cascade of sparks, turning them into tiny meteors that rained down around my boots. Through my shield, I watched the plaque become one with the building, permanent, unmovable, mine. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Just like Delia used to do it." The words warmed me more than any flame could. The final weld bead laid down smooth and even, exactly the way Mom had taught me. I killed the torch and lifted my shield, stepping back to inspect the work. Perfect penetration. No undercut. Clean as factory finish. The brushed steel letters caught the light. Sullivan Motors. Camera shutters clicked rapid fire. Sarah's photographer, Tommy, darted around trying to catch different angles, but it was Marcia who caught my eye and mouthed, "Look at what you built." I had to blink hard at that. Because she was right. This wasn't just a shop sign. This was resurrection. This was taking back a name that Dad had tried to bury in whispers and lies. This was Mom's legacy rising from the ashes he'd scattered. "Ms. Sullivan?" Sarah stepped forward, recorder in hand. "Do you have a moment?" The crowd quieted, pressing closer. I pulled off my gloves, tucked them into my back pocket. "Sure. Your father's departure from town has people talking," she said. "Any comment on that?" I shook my head. This isn't about him anymore. Then what would you say this is about? What do you want people to take from your story? The question hung in the air. Behind Sarah, I could see faces I'd known my whole life. People who'd believed Dad's lies. People who'd turned away when I needed help. People who were now watching me with something between awe and shame. But there were others, too. Marcus standing proud by the bay doors, Marcia with her clipboard and fierce smile, Mrs. Henderson dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I looked up at the plaque, still warm from welding. Mom used to say that metal had memory, that it remembered every bend, every strike, every heat. That's why you had to be careful with it, respectful. Because whatever you did to it became part of its story forever. The same was true for people, I realized. We remember every blow, every betrayal, every attempt to reshape us into something we're not. But we also remember every act of kindness, every moment of strength, every time we chose to stand instead of break. I turned back to Sarah, smiled, and said the words that had been building in me since that first night in the garage. He buried me in shame. I built an empire from it. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Tommy's camera clicked frantically, capturing the moment. Me in my work clothes, welding shield pushed back, standing beneath the newly mounted sign that declared to the world that the Sullivan name meant something different now, something stronger. Sarah scribbled in her notepad, grinning. "That's one hell of a quote." "It's one hell of a truth," Marcia added, coming to stand beside me. The morning light caught the fresh welds, making them shine like silver rivers across the steel. Dad might have left town in disgrace, his reputation in tatters, his carefully built facade finally crumbled to dust. But he'd left something behind he never meant to. A daughter who'd learned to turn fire into foundation, shame into strength. I reached up and touched the still warm metal of our name. Mom's and mine now, no one else's. The steel held the heat like a promise. I believe stories like this find us for a reason. If this one touched you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day, and tomorrow's might be the one your heart's been waiting for.